Imagine looking into the eyes of the man who brutally took your mother's life and saying, "I forgive you." Now imagine inviting that same man into your home years later, giving him a job and offering him a path to redemption, only for him to return to those very same hallways to finish what he started. Most people believe that the ultimate act of human grace is forgiveness. We are taught from a young age to let go of bitterness, to seek the humanity in those who have wronged us, and to believe, above all else, in the possibility of a second chance. But what happens when that grace is extended to someone who doesn't want to be saved? What happens when mercy becomes a death sentence? Welcome to Cold Trail Crimes. Here, we peel back the layers of the cases that haunt the shadows of the human psyche, the stories that are as much about the depths of the heart as they are about the evidence left behind. If you are drawn to the mysteries that the world tried to forget and the complex truths behind the headlines, join our community by hitting that subscribe button and turning on your notifications. You won't want to miss a single detail of what we've uncovered. This is the haunting, tragic, and ultimately cautionary tale of Martha McKay. To understand the tragedy of 2020, we have to travel back 24 years to a time when the snowy Egret was not a place of healing, but a house of high society and prestige. In 1996, the Arkansas Delta was a place of stark contrasts. On one side of the gate stood the snowy Egret, a historic, sprawling Spanish-style villa owned by the McKay family. Sally McKay was the heart of that home, a prominent Memphis socialite and a generous philanthropist. Sally was the kind of woman whose presence filled a room. She was wealthy, yes, but she was known more for her spirit than her bank account. But on September 10th, 1996, that spirit was violently extinguished. It was a Tuesday night. Sally was at the house with her nephew, Lee Baker, a well-known local blues guitarist. They were likely enjoying the quiet breeze off Horseshoe Lake when the darkness invaded. There was no grand motive, no complex conspiracy, just a teenage boy with a gun and a desperate, hollowed-out need for cash. The scene the investigators found the next morning was something out of a nightmare. Sally and Lee had been shot to death in cold blood. The house, usually a sanctuary of music and laughter, was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioner and the static of a life interrupted. The police didn't have to look far for a suspect. His name was Travis Lewis. He was only 16 years old. Travis lived just down the road in a pocket of poverty that sat in the shadow of the McKay estate. He was a boy who had slipped through every crack in the system, a history of trouble, a broken home, and a growing dependency on whatever could numb the reality of his life. When the police closed in, the shock wasn't just that he had done it, it was the sheer senselessness of it. He had killed two people for a few $100s and some electronics. There was no sanity to find in the motive, only a terrifying, impulsive void. While the community of Horseshoe Lake recoiled in horror and the legal system sharpened its blades, one voice began to sound different from the rest. Sally's daughter, Martha McKay, was devastated. Her world had been shattered. In the immediate aftermath, the rest of the family sought the harshest possible justice. They wanted the death penalty. They wanted Travis Lewis to never see the sun again. And who could blame them? But as the months turned into years, Martha found herself at a crossroads. She looked at the photos of her mother, a woman who spent her life helping the less fortunate, and she began to ask a radical, uncomfortable question. Would my mother want another life destroyed in her name? Martha realized that if she carried the weight of hatred for the rest of her life, Travis Lewis would have killed her too. Not with a bullet, but with bitterness. While her family pulled away in grief and anger, Martha began to lean in. She began to look past the monster the media described and started looking for the 16-year-old boy who had been lost long before he ever picked up a gun. This was the birth of a transformation that would change the course of her life and ultimately lead to her death. To most people, the snowy Egret was a tomb, a place defined by the blood spilled on its floors in 1996. But Martha McKay saw it differently. She moved back into the estate, not to hide from the past, but to reclaim it. She spent years meticulously restoring the villa, turning the site of her greatest trauma into a high-end bed and breakfast. She wanted to fill the halls with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of guests laughing, effectively overwriting the echoes of that terrible Tuesday night. But Martha's restoration wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. While the world moved on and Travis Lewis sat behind the bars of an Arkansas prison, Martha did something unthinkable. She picked up a pen. She began writing to the man who had orphaned her. At first, it may have been for answers, the why that haunts every survivor. But soon the correspondence evolved. Martha began to see Travis not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a product of a broken environment. From a psychological perspective, what Martha was practicing is known as restorative justice. It is a theory that focuses on the rehabilitation of offenders through reconciliation with victims and the community at large. Experts often debate the safety of this practice, but for Martha, it was a calling. She wasn't just looking for closure. She genuinely believed that if she showed Travis the love and guidance he had lacked as a child, she could fix the broken parts of his soul. The letters eventually turned into face-to-face visits. Martha would drive to the prison, sitting across from the man who had ended her mother's life. She saw a man who seemed remorseful, a man who was aging behind bars, and in her eyes, a young man who never had a chance. However, this mission of mercy created a profound rift within the McKay family. Her sister and other relatives watched in a mixture of horror and disbelief. To them, Travis Lewis was a predator who had stolen their peace. They saw Martha's empathy not as a strength, but as a dangerous vulnerability. They warned her. They pleaded with her. They stayed away from the snowy egret, unable to reconcile the beauty Martha was building with the monster she was inviting back into their lives. Then came 2018. After 23 years, the parole board made a decision that sent shivers through the community. Travis Lewis was being released. The state deemed him rehabilitated, a success story of the penal system. When the prison gates finally swung open, Travis didn't find himself alone or homeless. Waiting for him, with a heart full of hope and a job offer in hand, was Martha McKay. She didn't just forgive him, she gave him the keys to her world. She hired him to do maintenance and yard work at the snowy egret, the very property where he had committed his original sin. Martha believed she was witnessing the final chapter of a redemption story. She had no way of knowing she was actually scripting her own tragedy. For a while, it looked like Martha's gamble had paid off. Travis Lewis could be seen around the snowy egret, mowing the lawns and repairing the fences of the sprawling estate. Martha didn't just give him a paycheck, she gave him a lifeline. She bought him a cell phone, helped him navigate a world that had moved from cassette tapes to smartphones while he was away, and treated him with a dignity he had arguably never earned. But as the honeymoon phase of his release faded, the atmosphere at the snowy egret began to shift. Neighbors and friends who visited the bed and breakfast began to voice their unease. They described Travis as unsettling, a man who seemed to linger in the shadows of the hallways he was meant to be cleaning. He was a man out of time, struggling to adapt to the 21st century and buckling under the weight of the very freedom Martha had fought to give him. Then the red flags turned into flashing sirens. Martha began to notice small things disappearing, a bit of cash here, a piece of jewelry there. The new Travis was beginning to slip, and the reason was a familiar demon in the rural South: methamphetamine. The drug took hold of him, stripping away the thin veneer of the rehabilitated man the parole board had seen. Martha was no fool. She saw the dilated pupils. She saw the erratic behavior. In early 2020, she made the agonizing decision to fire him. She told him he was no longer welcome at the snowy egret. But even then, her radical empathy remained her guiding light. She didn't call his parole officer. She didn't call the police. She knew that one phone call would send him back to a cage for the rest of his life, and she still wanted to protect him from the system. She chose mercy one last time. It was a choice that would cost her everything. On the morning of March 25, 2020, the silence of the snowy egret was shattered. Travis Lewis didn't come as a stranger. He came as a man who knew every crevice, every loose floorboard, and every lock in that house. He didn't just break in, he invaded a sanctuary he had been invited into. When he encountered Martha, there was no teenage panic like there had been in 1996. This was different. This was intimate. This was a betrayal of the highest order. The struggle was violent and prolonged, a horrific echo of the blood spilled in those same rooms 24 years prior. The timeline of the end. At 7 a.m., the silent security alarm at the snowy Egret is triggered. At 7:15 a.m., Crittenden County deputies arrive at the scene. They find the back door ajar, the same way Travis had entered decades ago. At 7:20 a.m., as deputies sweep the perimeter, they look up. A man, Travis Lewis, is seen leaping from a second-story window, hitting the ground, and sprinting toward the tree line. At 7:25 a.m., officers enter the home. At the top of the stairs, they find Martha. The woman who had spent 20 years writing letters of love and forgiveness was gone, silenced by the very hand she had held in friendship. As Travis Lewis hit the ground after his desperate leap from the second floor, the serene morning at Horseshoe Lake dissolved into a frantic manhunt. The deputies, still reeling from the sight of a man escaping a potential murder scene, gave chase. Travis didn't run for the road. He didn't head for the woods. He ran toward the water, the very lake that had mirrored the snowy Egret for over a century. The chase was short but surreal. Cornered by the police of the present and pursued by the ghosts of a crime he committed in 1996, Travis reached the edge of the pier. With nowhere left to turn, he plunged into the freezing, murky waters of Horseshoe Lake. The officers watched from the shore, shouting for him to return. For a few moments, they saw him struggling, his head bobbing above the surface as he tried to swim toward the center of the lake. But the cold was too much, or perhaps the weight of what he had done finally pulled him down. Without a sound, Travis Lewis slipped beneath the surface and disappeared. His body would be recovered by divers later that day, just a few hundred yards from the house he had turned into a slaughterhouse twice over. Back inside the snowy Egret, the scene was one of devastating irony. As investigators processed the rooms where Martha had lived and breathed her philosophy of grace, they found a duffel bag Travis had packed before the alarm went off. Inside weren't just random electronics or cash. He had gone for the legacy. The bag was stuffed with Martha's mother's old silverware and heirloom jewelry, the very item Sally McKay had owned when Travis killed her 24 years earlier. He wasn't just stealing valuables. He was stealing the history Martha had spent her life trying to preserve. He was plucking the jewels from the hand that had fed him. Today, the snowy Egret stands in a heavy, hollow silence. It is a house that defies the odds of tragedy, a place where two generations of women, mother and daughter, were taken by the same hand, in the same rooms, decades apart. It is a grim monument to a cycle of violence that even the purest form of mercy couldn't break. The story of Martha McKay leaves us with a haunting question that sits at the core of the human experience. Was her forgiveness a mistake? To some, Martha was a victim of her own naivety, a woman who allowed her ideals to blind her to a predator's nature. But to others, Martha's life was a testament to a level of courage most of us will never possess. She chose to live in a world where people can change, even if, in this one instance, she was tragically wrong. She met an unfixable person with an unbreakable spirit. Martha often lived by a principle found in the teachings she followed. Hate is not overcome by hate. By love alone is hate appeased. This is an eternal law. Martha McKay lived by that law until her final breath. She lost her life, but she never lost her humanity. And perhaps in the dark world of true crime, that is the most profound mystery of all. If this story moved you or made you rethink the limits of forgiveness, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Cold Trail Crimes for more deep dives into the cases that define our world. Thank you for watching.